to feel the pinch, because for the last 30 days or so, we've had some insurance money trickle in, some receivables that have come in. Maybe we've sold some contact lenses. But what's going to happen over the next 30, 60, 90 days is as we recover, we're going to have a lag in the receivables that are going to start to come in from insurance companies, even as we are delivering care. That care costs us money. In other words, it costs money to run our business, but we've got this lag in getting the receivables from the insurance companies. So Adam, let me pitch it to you. If I've got this scenario where the money's not coming in, I've got all these bills that are due, how do I decide who gets paid first? How do I prioritize the bills that I do have to make sure that we're keeping the business afloat, but yet we're honoring the liabilities that we have with our vendors?
Good question, Mick. I think part of what you have to do is go through kind of almost a SWOT analysis of your expenses, right? What are the essential sales? What are the essential expenses in the business that you need to take into consideration? A lot of the clients that we've had conversations with, one of the first calls was to their landlord and talking about the rent that they owe, and seeing one of two things that we've seen happen. Either they tack on April and May's rent on the back end of the lease, so they just extend the current lease by another 2 months, or they're saying, we take anything, we'll let you go rent free for the next 2 months and then just amortize those 2 months over the rest of 2019. At the end of the day, as long as you have an agreement between both parties, that's what's important here. You have to be proactive and open up lines of communication with everybody. I think that this is where cash is king and cash flow is paramount. I'd rather practices have access to funding and not need it than need it and not have it. And this does kind of go down that slippery slope of, there was a question in the chat very beginning of, I've received my PPP funds, but then my office is closed, so what do I do with the funds? There's, like, we've had and I don't want to go down the PPP role or rabbit hole too deep right now, because we could lose ourselves in the what if scenarios for the rest of the time that we have here today. But I think the most important thing that we need to understand as business owners, right? I run my own firm, you all run your own practices, is that there is a fine line to understanding the things that we A, have control over right now, and B, have clarity around, and the things that we have neither of in the future. So what are the things that you can make decisions around right now? If you can answer those two questions as you're asking yourself, okay, so situation XYZ is in front of me. A, do I have clarity around my options? And B, am I in control of those options? Now we're in a position where we can expend the energy that we have and the time that we have each day to make a decision. But I've seen so many conversations go down so many rabbit holes on forgiveness scenarios and forgiveness calculations. We've received 3 sets of guidance from SBA and Treasury already, and we haven't even gotten to the forgiveness period yet. So I caution practices on trying to get surgical with their forgiveness calculations with PPP, excuse me. View it as a loan. Yes, some of it will be forgiven, but don't wrap up all your time in that. Don't forget that there are other areas. Have conversations with your landlord. Again, that's a big one, because rent roll is typically, a decent monthly nut from an expense standpoint in a practice.
Well, hey, listen, I still appreciate your comments about this forgiveness on the PPP. That is probably one of the biggest questions that I've been getting all week, because as practices are getting funded, the next question suddenly becomes, how do I use it? How do I spend it? And you raise a great point that if we try to spend too much energy trying to figure out something that hasn't been clarified, it's very likely that things are going to change anyway. And so what I'm advising folks to do is just record everything. Just keep track of every single transaction, so that you have the information readily available. And when we get some clarity and some guidance on how that money needs to be spent, we can address that. But I wanted to ask Gina about the next 90 days. I mean, these are going to be sticky times. What are your thoughts about how you're going to manage your cash flow over the next 90 days if we do see this lag in receivables, or maybe your patient volume isn't quite what you expected, and maybe you don't get the Minnesota snowstorm effect? How are you planning to manage that just from a cash flow standpoint?
So in thinking about what things we already have in place in our practice that need to be continued, or if you don't have this in place, you need to start, is I think simply from the patient dynamic and perspective of them coming in, that copay has to be collected today. when they're in for their appointment, and we can be very candid, I think, with our patients, you know, hey, you know how you used to like to come back and bring your spouse with you for that glasses selection? In order to limit the exposure, it's going to have to be you by yourself. And we really encourage you while you're in here in the office today to make that decision and make that purchase. You should be buying and paying in full for a year's supply of contact lenses to minimize the number of times you would possibly have to come in or interact with us. All of those things will help you with your cash flow if you have people pay for things in full now, right? And I don't think anybody could be surprised, and you can be very professional about doing that. And many of you probably already have those things in place, but I think your staff needs to know and understand that more than ever. Those are some of the things I have going through my head. You know, the other things that we have in place to help us get through this is, you know, fortunately I've had some systems in place, and I know Adam speaks to all of this on his podcast and does a great job of, you know, profit first, and Mick is a profit first professional. You know, things like that have really helped me during these times and will help me through the next 90 days. And I know that doesn't necessarily help those who haven't had something like that in place retroactively, but you can always start now by putting those things in order so that you can be more prepared, even if it's something you can't put in place for another couple of months. Those are the sorts of things. What can we do to improve our processes now when we have the time to evaluate them that will help us in any future scenario or situation where cash flow may be tight for us?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
you know,
what I would add to that, just one final thought, and I would encourage everybody to write this down. I'm really a big fan of writing down important phrases. This isn't mine. This is with Winston Churchill, right? Never let a good crisis go to waste. And so with what we're going through right now, ask yourself, what are the changes that you've wanted to make in your practice that you've been always, quote unquote, too busy to change because you're spending so much time working in the practice that you haven't been able to work on the practice? Here's your time. And so think about ways in which you can positively impact your practice, the patient experience, the business model that you have in place. We don't know when that will come to fruition, but now is the time, so to speak, to begin laying that foundation for the changes that you want to see in your practice when things do get back to, quote unquote, a new normal.
Great advice. Great advice. All right, guys, thank you for that. Let's move on. We've got one more sort of big topic that I want to talk about for a minute, and this is mental and emotional recovery. And again, here's some data from Women in Optometry and Review of Optometric Business. How's your stress and anxiety level? Well, pretty high for most of us. And I think for me personally, about 10 days into this crisis is where it really just sort of hit me. And now we've sort of evolved out of that, and I'm feeling a lot better. And in fact, I'm feeling so good, I'm rather enjoying some of the little perks that have come along with a little bit more sleep, a little bit more time with the family. You know, I haven't touched a razor in a month. So there are some very interesting positive things that have sort of come out of this experience. So much so that I think for some of us, actually getting back into the routine of work is actually going to be maybe a little harder than what we anticipated. It's like taking that long vacation, and that you get that pit in your stomach when you're thinking about going back to the office. So Adam, let's start with you, because you're a personal finance guy, and I bet you have dealt with some very high levels of emotion and anxiety in and around personal investments and retirement accounts. And what are you seeing and feeling about sort of the emotional recovery that we're going to experience after this?
So it's an interesting conversation that happens, because whenever I have a conversation, not necessarily with clients that we work with, because what I'm about to say is what we spend a lot of time doing, but the people that we talk to that have a lot of anxiety around their investments, a lot of anxiety around their retirement planning, is that they have an investment portfolio without a financial plan. And so they've accumulated some stuff, right? They've got a 401k over here, maybe a defined benefit plan, cash balance plan over here, some taxable accounts, a Roth, kids' college education, et cetera, et cetera. But there's really no plan that's put in place. And the best metaphor that I use to explain this to people, it's like if you dump out a puzzle on the table and then you throw away the box and you feverishly start trying to put the pieces of that puzzle together again. If you didn't know what the box looked like, you can very quickly get frustrated, become anxious, and eventually maybe just throw up your hands and say, I quit. Well, the most important tool that you need to put together a puzzle is the box, right? We have to have the vision, no pun intended, of what it is that we're trying to create, and then understand the tools, concepts, resources, and applications that we have at our disposal as income earners in a medical profession that, again, traditionally and statistically speaking, compared to the average incomes in the country, are much higher than the average. And B, for practice owners on the call, you have the business as not only part of your personal net worth, but also as a tool to help you build retirement wealth, reduce your taxes now. And so in the absence of having a financial plan, both personally and professionally, the absence of that amplifies the stress, fear, and anxiety that we have around our investments. So one of the biggest things, again, back to what I said earlier, right? The two things that we love as individuals is a sense of control and a sense of clarity. The same thing applies to an investment philosophy and an investment portfolio. You need that foundation. And so what we'll do is we'll have those conversations with individuals and then start assembling their financial plan, making sure, as the name of our firm suggests, like, how is everything integrated? How is what you're doing in your practice influencing what you're doing on the personal side? Again, cash is king right now. To your point, the practice owners that are sitting on a lot of cash right now that haven't over leveraged themselves, right? What's the quote on leverage? He who understands leverage doesn't use it. He who doesn't abuses it. And so from a debt standpoint, the far less leveraged your practice is. And if you are leveraged right now, again, do what you need to do, work with your team, work with your advisors to help understand what the needles and what levers you need to pull. But there's a sense of calm, to your point, Mick, of this is time to reset, refocus, and re-engage. So necessity is the mother of all innovation, right? So when we talk about what this new normal looks like, as you think about your emotional state right now, are you operating what I call above the line or below the line, right? If you're feeling empowered, motivated, clear, that's what we consider like an above the line state. If you're below the line, anxious, nervous, scared, fearful, figure out what are those triggers that you're having. And then I can't take credit for this. If there are any fans of Tim Ferriss out there, check out his TED Talk on fear setting. So we do a lot of goal setting in life as practice owners. Check out his TED Talk on fear setting. It's a 12 or 13 minute TED Talk. He gives you examples on how to go through and basically through journaling, through writing down what it is that you're fearful right now and working through those scenarios to put you in that place or get you closer to a place of again, feeling more in control and empowered. So we all talk about getting back to normal. And on this last week's episode of the podcast, I rhetorically asked the question, how was normal serving you? And I'd ask everybody on the call to just quite literally pause. I'm not going to take too much time here, but like do a personal inventory, personally, professionally in your practice, and financially. And how was normal serving you? And are you, as I say, planning life on purpose? Again, through all three of those filters. So define what your normal was. And if you were doing great, awesome. That's great. If you were firing on all cylinders, awesome. But if your normal previously wasn't necessarily serving you well, man, if there wasn't a time to start thinking about how you can redefine and recraft a quote unquote new normal, then I don't know what is, right? So don't let a good crisis go to waste is how I'd kind of sum up that monologue.
Man, Adam, I love that. I love that because I've spent a lot of time thinking about that for myself, which is what are those things that I have not enjoyed about sort of the routine of life that now are a little bit different, and I've been able to shed some of that. And I am not welcoming some of that stuff back into my life. I mean, there are definitely some changes that have to occur for the positive, of course. So Aaron, I wanted to ask you sort of along the same lines, have you made, and I haven't asked you this question before, so I'm sort of putting you on the spot, but are there any personal changes that you're making in your, with some of the things with hobbies or activities? What's, on a personal level, how are you seeing all this maybe changing in the future for you?
Yeah, definitely. I've always had that mentality of just being busy, just always wanting to do stuff. If I sit at home, I get anxious. So that's why I'm in the office. I come to the office every day with my normal hours, but I've discovered a lot of things while I'm at the office because I obviously have a lot less to do now. Completely re-landscaped our whole building. Just did it myself because I had the time, and that was something I never knew I enjoyed. I would have never, probably my whole life, thought I would enjoy that. So just different things like that. And, just exploring life, just seeing what you can do in the office too. I've just been coming in, just looking around. I've rearranged some equipment. We've put in a new inventory system. So all of that is kind of, hopefully will help the office when we get back into the flow of things. It's like what Adam was saying, don't let a good crisis go to waste. This is time to reevaluate. both in the
Yeah.
practice and then outside as well. Just picked up a few new hobbies, got more into running, different things like that. I always have been a weightlifter, so just stuff like that where you really see a different perspective. You're able to spend more time with friends and family.
That's great. That's great. Gina, yesterday you said something to me that just really resonated to me and with me. And I was sharing that, you know, I've been almost busier over the last 3 or 4 weeks than I'm normally busy. And so some of the things that in my own practice that I feel like we should have implemented, like embracing telehealth a little bit more, or maybe making some changes. We certainly didn't do any landscaping on the outside of our building. But you said something to me that really resonated. And it was around the lines of, you know what, if you haven't done anything but just survived, that's okay. Because what we've gone through is such a catastrophic event that none of us could have predicted. Would you just expound on that just a little bit more, what you were sharing with me yesterday about this idea of, you know, it's kind of okay if just you got through this?
You know, I think for most of us that are practice owners, obviously there's a fair amount of drive and ambition that brought us to this place to begin with. And so if you're anything like me, I think to myself, well, you know, we're reset, we've got this time, I should get things done. I should try and do all of these things. And we're being inundated with emails and information, and we're not only trying to wade through that, but then there's all these inspirations about, well, maybe I should, you know, do this 12-week fitness program, and maybe I should, you know, paint my office and redecorate and do this and this and this. And I think sometimes social media brings you down a little bit in that when you hear about what other people are doing. And I just started thinking to myself the other day, you know what, these are really stressful, crazy times. And when we look back on this, if we just got through it and we were okay, we're not going to remember if we straightened out that random room in our home that we've been meaning to straighten out for 3 years, or, you know, we implemented a training program that our staff went through that made it so that they were, you know, that much better. I think we just have to allow ourselves a little bit of grace, because that pressure in and of itself is another form of stress, you know, to your graph that you have showing here, that I think contributed to me, at least in the first many weeks, of a higher than usual amount of stress. So that pressure, I think I'm trying to take a step back and be like, you know, I might get some of these things done, but I might not, and that's okay.
I love it. I really so appreciate that insight, because I think there are differences in how we are hardwired emotionally and how we deal with crisis, and however you've gotten through this situation is okay. I think ultimately we're going to all come out of this better. When I look back and I think about the dot-com bust that we went through, the recession that we experienced in 2008, I look at how I came out of that personally on the other side, and every single crisis that we've experienced makes us a better person. And I think we're all going to be able to look back on this one and say that as difficult of a time as was for us, I think that we're all going to look back and say there's some really good things that came out of this for all of us. So listen, guys, we are wrapping up. We want to leave a few minutes for some Q&A. Let me just say thank you guys so much, the panelists. All three of these that are on with us today are Vision Expo speakers. They were all scheduled to speak in New York and also in Las Vegas this fall. We have our fingers crossed that the Expo West is going to occur as usual this fall. I haven't heard that it isn't, so I'm going to throw it out there. And we are expecting that these three folks are going to be part of our business program, just like we had them scheduled for New York. So if you like what they said, come please visit them. They're very insightful, and really just a new generation of sort of young thought leaders within our profession that I just really love what they have to say. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Terrence, and if he wants to help us navigate some questions.
Hey, well, thanks a lot, Mick. Really appreciate it as well. So, Mick, a question that I'm seeing a lot is a question about frame sanitization. What are we going to do about keeping those sanitized and be able to make sure there's no germs for trying on frames?
Great question. I have seen a few ideas floated around there. Does anybody have any thoughts on how you might keep your frame sanitized from either just a perception standpoint with our patients and customers, or even obviously from a health standpoint as well?
Yeah. You know, in early March, we started this technique where we would have basically collection bins. So patient would try on a frame, decide if they like it or not. If they didn't, they put it in the bin. Then the opticians would take that bin, basically hand clean each frame with a solution and put them back on the shelf. And there's been a lot of talk about getting these UV light sanitation devices for frames as well. So that's another thing to consider. But yeah, just basically having that kind of that visual of, you know, we're collecting these frames, we're not putting them back on the board, we're cleaning them first. I think that's really reassuring for patients.
What I think one of the most common questions is what are you using to clean the frames? I think one of the big frame manufacturers was recommending hydrogen peroxide diluted with water as a good source. Has anybody thought of, read, or heard of any good solutions that we should be using? I know hypochlorous acid is a real popular disinfectant right now. So what are your thoughts on the solutions?
Yeah, we've been doing hydrogen peroxide for ours at that recommendation, so which is hopefully been working. So.
Gina, have you guys given thought to disinfecting procedures?
Yeah, no, we have focused on the hypochlorous acid and being able to utilize that. Of course, we had already been doing this, but we'll do this more. You know, the patient sits down and we handle all the frames to limit how many people are touching and selecting. And then the frames placed, like Aaron said, in a tray to clean. But I think, and I continue to preach this, we cannot all underestimate the power of hot soapy water. You know, that still is better. It is better than hand sanitizer. I mean, so why we're dismissing that? And I don't know if there are certain soaps that would be more or less abrasive, but that will certainly be a method that we will potentially employ as necessary. I think sometimes we get a little too comfortable with sprays and disinfectants doing everything that they should, but we can't discount the also abrasive process, gentle abrasive process of washing and soaping something up and then cleaning it off.
That's a great point. There was actually, I don't know where I saw it, ODs on Facebook, or maybe it was on Aaron's group with ODs on Finance, but somebody published an article that went into great detail about the chemistry of soap and why it works. It has a water loving into the molecule and a lipid loving into the molecule, and it's perfect for separating the lipid membrane of a virus. And so not only does it just wash it down the sink, but it actually destroys the virus. So it reminded me of, you're right, we use all these alcohol-based hand sanitizers and cleaning products, but just soap, detergent, is really a very powerful disinfectant that we probably ought to be thinking about using. Anybody else have any thoughts on sort of the cleaning of the frames?
Yeah, we used to use a citrus-based material so that it was biodegradable and friendly to those people who were actually doing the cleaning. I owned REM, and so as you can imagine, as a supplier, we had tens of thousands of frames that went through our facility to be refurbished, that were on your frame boards perhaps, that come back to the companies that there's nothing wrong with them, they just need to be refurbished and recarded and repaged. So in any event, my point is that we used a non-toxic material that was in fact from orange peel base that did the job and did not harm the material. You have to remember, with acetate, it is sensitive to other chemicals and can react in really good ways. For instance, it could cloud the finish of that acetate and essentially attack it and destroy it.
Mike, great. Thank you for that. That is great information. Is there a commercially available place that we could get this citrus-based cleaner?
I'm sure, obviously there is. I think we just got it like at a Home Depot. I mean, it's readily available as a cleaning agent that's in the green category, if you will. And having so many people handle the products, we were particularly sensitive to that. I know at factories, they use a 70% alcohol-based material or chemical. I just happened to ask this week because Mitch Barkley had asked me about that. So I reached out to one of my factory buddies and he showed me a video of them cleaning the frames before they package them.
Great, Mike, fantastic information. Yeah, that's really good to know. So thank you for that.
But you're right about soap and water. You don't really have to overthink this.
Yeah.
And I would say that the biggest issue has always been, I'm talking for decades, silicone nose pads. If you think about and look at anybody's boards and you look where there are silicone nose pads, people's skin chemistry, and especially female frames, the makeup that builds up on those nose pads is so disgusting. I don't know how people put them on in the early days, like last month.
Right. Right. Great. All right, Terrence, what else? Anything else we've got?
So far, that was the biggest question, actually, Mick. About 11 people asking that same question. But if anyone else has any questions, feel free to use the chat box, or if you would like to join the discussion, you can use the raise your hand feature. But that was the big one. Someone did ask Mick about checking their staff and patients' temperature before coming in.
Yeah, so great question. There are lots of devices available that you can pick up on Amazon that we can use to check our patients and our team members' temperatures. I'll ask the panel here in a second. My position is I'm not sure if you're going to pick up a high temperature in an asymptomatic patient. It's, I suppose, possible. So that's the first question that I have. The second thing that I'm considering is I am anticipating that we're going to get some sort of guidance either from the CDC or maybe from your local town or maybe your state that tells us what we need to be doing. I'm in California, and there's no doubt in California they're going to have some rules in and around this. But I'm curious, what's everybody else thought about checking temperatures for either your staff or your patients?
You know, I got an infrared thermometer that's touchless that works really well, but I'm also in your camp, Mick, that I think a lot of people that may be carriers are asymptomatic. So the thermometer I anticipate using in case somebody is unsure, you know, because we're going to have screening questions before patients come in. If you or somebody in your household that you've been in close contact with has had a fever within the last 24 to 72 hours, we ask that you reschedule your appointment. And if they're for some reason not sure, it can be used to validate. I do worry a bit about some false positives because I have noticed it's very sensitive. If you're not directly on the forehead center, if you're off to the, to the side, it seems like it can measure a little bit higher. So is it a valid piece of information, or is it more of a peace of mind? And you know what? Only you can answer that and make a decision in your practice what you think would be best. I am also waiting on guidelines on what we should be doing for our patients. And I think the most important thing to remember is that for the most of us, when we're seeing patients, our patients are coming in because they are healthy and feel good and are just getting something checked with their eyes that's more normal and routine, even if they're a glaucoma patient or a retina patient. We're not seeing patients who are usually sick for any reason. And so I think that helps our case a lot.
Yeah. Aaron, do you have any thoughts on checking temperatures of your patients when they come in?
Yeah, for right now, we're just going to stick with asking questions. Have you been out of the country? Have you had a fever or any symptoms recently? The thing with contactless thermometers, it seems like a good idea. Do have a few friends, we're in the Bay Area, we're got a lot of engineers around here, a few friends that actually work on that equipment, and they've stated that, hey, it's not super accurate. So that's something that concerns me a little bit. Not to say, it's a good peace of mind, and they might be more accurate than we think. So, and who knows what the CDC will say. They might say that, hey, this is a thing that we got to do. But right now we're just sticking with questions. And going back to what you said, Mick, there's a lot of asymptomatic individuals as well. How do we funnel those out too? That's a big question. There was a recent study that found that we might have 50 times as many asymptomatic and carrier patients than we thought we initially had. That came out of Santa Clara recently. So
yeah, and I think Gina raises a good point. Is what happens if you get a 100.4 reading? Now, what are you going to say? You've got this completely asymptomatic patient in your office who's needing some maybe routine care, and you put up the barriers and say you can't get any further till I check your temperature, and it's slightly elevated. Now, what do you do? That becomes almost a public relations issue as much as anything else, because we don't know if it matters. We don't know if it's accurate. So I just think there's a lot to be considered on checking temperature. So as I said, our position is going to be, we're kind of just taking a wait and see approach to this as well. All right, Terrence, anything else popping up?
So Mick, we have one last question. It's actually a live question. So Nabil, if you can unmute Jason Kaplan, he wanted to ask a question live. All right, Jason, go ahead.
Hey, Jason.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Thanks, guys. I wanted to ask a quick question because I know there's a lot of ODs on here, a lot of practice managers. I'm a sales consultant with a distributor, and I know it's the last thing a lot of everyone is thinking about because your focus is on your practice, getting patients back in. But questions that we're asking in our company and things we're trying to come up with is how are a lot of doctors or practice managers feeling about how they want to interact with salespeople going forward? Because normally we would sometimes, if we didn't have appointments or work with those accounts, we would walk in, introduce ourselves. How are they thinking about managing that? Because we want to make sure that we are respecting everyone else and making sure that we are also there to do our job, but also to provide that service that helps you guys at the same time, and, you know, finding that balance as well.
Man, Jason, that is a great question, and I think that's something that I would have never thought about had you not asked that question. But I think it's very respectful of you to even present that question and be considerate of the fact that you guys have many accounts and you go into many different offices, and many practice owners or optician owners might see the encounter differently. So let me pose that to the panel. Does anybody have any thoughts about your sales reps? How are you going to manage your normal interactions with your reps in the office?
You know, I think for me, and I've been of this camp for a number of years anyway, is that we love that our reps are here for us, but we do not have to see you face to face for us to know that you support our clinic and that we can get valuable information from you. So we've already had tried starting limiting some of that. So I think Zoom meetings are going to be just fine in the next foreseeable future for us. I think that there is sometimes pressure maybe from the company, depending on the rep or the rep themselves, they want to physically come into the office. I think you're going to just have to maybe let that go. And remember, we're all dealing with a lot right now. And sometimes it might be too much to have that pressure on top of seeing patients. Well, how are we going to manage the rep? When are they going to come in? How are we going to space them so that they're not exposed to something they don't need to be exposed to? I think that virtual meetings for the next foreseeable, 6 to 12 months will probably be more the norm than anything. Now, frame reps and things like that might be a little bit different, but I know already we do a lot of online management and ordering with our frame reps. So that again might be something that is, new-ish to our practice, more so than what it was before.
Yeah, I agree with Gina completely on that one. I mean, just online meetings are perfectly fine. As Bob Dylan said, the times are changing. It's different now. So having those virtual meetings is great. If you need to come into the office, call us, let us know, tell us why this brings value to both us and both you to be in the office, but otherwise virtual.
Great answers, guys. Thank you very much. All right, Terrence, I think we're coming up right to our hour, so I'll let you close this out.
Absolutely, Mick. Thanks so much. Mick, can you do me a favor and just hit the stop sharing your screen button? I just want to share something for next week. Perfect. Well, Mick, thank you so much. Really appreciate the discussion. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Adam. This is a very beneficial discussion. It gives us a lot to think about. Just to let you know, the video of this will be posted by next Monday on our YouTube account. So if you had any questions or wanted to revisit any of the topics, please feel free to visit our YouTube account by next week, Monday. Now, next week's Coffee Talk, as you guys know, we try to have a guest moderator every week. Will be from the American Telehealth Association, and they will be talking about telemedicine. So please tune in next week, Wednesday, 12:15 Eastern. EYE2EYE Series has our Coffee Talk on Wednesdays, but we also have on Fridays, we have something called Happy Hour. Now, Happy Hour is dealing more with creatives topics. Not sure why that's not coming up there. Try sharing it. So this week, our Happy Hour is going to be titled Art of the Collab. We'll be talking with some of the most prolific frame collaborators in the industry. We have Christian Roth, we have Coco and Breezy, we have Corey Shapiro from Vintage Frames, and Terry Lassery. And they're going to talk through some of their collabs as well as the thought process and the creative process that goes into that as well. So please tune into that. That's going to be Friday at 4:15 p.m. But again, Mick, thank you so much for doing this. We thank you all for taking time out of your day to attend Coffee Talk. There's so many people from all over. So thank you, Connecticut. Thank you, Atlanta. Thank you, California, Los Angeles. Hello, Kylie. We see you. Thank you, Brooklyn. Gerard. Hello, Dr. Choops from Texas. And there are so many more. So thank you all for attending, all 350 that were on. And we will see you Friday for happy hour or next Wednesday for Coffee Talk.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.